Welcome back to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. My name is Derek Brown. In today's video, we're going to run through 8 players that need to be higher in ECR, and all of this comes from all of the research I've done on the primer. If you want a wonderful edge on how to set your lineups and attack each slate weekly, you got to head to FantasyPros.com right now and read the primer. Let's get to these 8 players. All right, first guy up here on the list, Geno Smith, coming in at QB 13 in ECR, and I'm with it. I think he needs to be borderline QB1 for the week, and I think he can produce as that. Looking at what Detroit has done well, stopping the run, they're an elite run defense. That makes them into a pass funnel. Geno Smith can take advantage of it, and we know he has the weapons to do it. So far this season, QB 13 in fantasy points per game. He's 3rd in CPOE, so he's been good in a per dropback basis. Now you look at the Lions' pass defense, allowing the 11th highest success rate per dropback and the 13th highest EPA per dropback. Seattle's not going to be able to run the ball. They're going to have to throw, which means Geno is going to have a big day. All right, next player checking in on the list, and I had to find a tight end for this list, and it's tough out in the tight end streets, people. I'm not going to lie. It is hard to find anybody that's getting targets, routes, usage at all, much less being ranked outside the top 10 tight ends. But I got one for you. Mike Gesicki, coming in as the tight end 12 in ECR right now, and I'm with it. I think he can produce as a higher end tight end, a mid tight end 1, because that's what he's been over the last 2 weeks. Tight end 6 over the last 2 games in fantasy points per game. Gesicki's been producing. I know he's only got about a 52% route share. I get that. When he's on the field, he's drawing targets, though. 19% target share over the last 2 weeks. 3.2 yards per route run. These are fantastic numbers, and the matchup is glorious as well against the Carolina Panthers, who are giving up the 8th most receiving yards to tight ends and the 2nd most fantasy points per game. Mike Gesicki, welcome to tight end 1 land for another week. Okay, next player we got to discuss here, Braelon Allen. RB32 right now in ACR, and I understand that. I think he should be a mid RB3, but he can outproduce that. We've seen him already do it the last 2 games. RB6 and RB30 in fantasy over the last 2 weeks. And I know that RB6 production is touchdowns. I get it. But he could get a lot of work late in this game. Do we think the Denver Broncos are going to put up much of a fight versus the Jets? Probably not. If the Jets defense stomps them, and guess what? Braelon Allen's getting work late in this game. And what have we seen? He has a standalone role as the breather back in the Jets offense. 11.5 touches, 62 total yards over the last 2 games. But the other thing about it is he has been awesome on a per touch basis. So we can expect Braelon Allen to continue to make the most of whatever work that he's given. So look, over this season, amongst 50 qualifying running backs, he is top 5 in both missed tackles forced per attempt and 3rd in yards of contact per attempt. Look at Braelon Allen as a flex play, could end up as an RB2 because Denver can't stop the run at all. All right, staying on the running back position, and I'm going to talk about another player that, look, he's not the lead back in his offense, but game script goes his way, as well as being in a fantastic matchup, then Chase Brown is going to outproduce his RB39 ranking on Fantasy Pros right now. Just look at what Carolina's bad at. And I know I'm talking about a lot of Bengals, and I get it, but Cincinnati's going to score points. They got to go somewhere outside of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So here we are. Chase Brown has a wonderful matchup this week. Carolina, again, another team that cannot stop the run. They're giving up the 5th most rushing yards per game, and they have the 6th lowest stuff rate. So if we want Chase Brown to maximize his touches and break off big runs, end up being an RB3, fantastic flex play, maybe scoring a touchdown this week as well, this is a matchup where he can accomplish those things. Get him into your lineups as a flex play if you really, really need the help this week. All right, before I get to the next player up on this list, if you are juggling multiple fantasy football teams and feeling just a tad bit overwhelmed, Fantasy Pros is here to help you simplify things with the Fantasy Pros Multi-League Assistant. You can see the latest news, notes, and rankings for every single player across all of your teams. It's all in one spot, making your path to victory clearer and easier. Dive in and let us help you dominate all of your leagues with the Multi-League Assistant at fantasypros.com/myplaybook or on the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Download it today. All right, next running back we got to mention here, Roschon Johnson. We saw him get the work last week. He played 37% of snaps, got 12 touches, and turned out 64 total yards. And the Bears are looking for an answer in the backfield, and DeAndre Swift is not it. So, rumblings are coming out. Roschon Johnson's going to get a little more run this week. So, what does that mean? That means he's probably going to end up as an RB2 for the week. Looking at what he already did last week. Played the majority of the red zone snaps in the offense, 47%. That probably gets an uptick. So, Chicago, look, good passing matchup. They end up inside the 5, inside the 20. Roschon Johnson's probably getting the ball. So, probably a really good chance to score a touchdown this week. And the matchup on the ground is awesome just as well. The Rams have the 4th lowest stuff rate this season. They've allowed the highest rushing success rate this year. Roschon Johnson is a player you're going to look at as a flex player, an RB3 this week. He could end up with RB2 numbers when it's all said and done. All right, breaking into the top 3 players on this list, a player I've not discussed and not many people have talked about throughout this season because he's been hurt, DeAndre Hopkins. Coming in as wide receiver 40 for the week on FantasyPros, and this is a glorious matchup for Hopkins. You're looking at a matchup where he is going to face the 10th highest rate of too high in the NFL right now in this secondary. So the coverage matchup really dictates that it's going to be Hopkins getting all the targets and not Calvin Ridley. Last year against too high, DeAndre Hopkins led the team with a 25% target per route run rate, 2.23 yards per route run. What has he done in a small sample this year? Same thing, man. He has led the team with a 27% target per route run rate and 2.1 yards per route run. Against a secondary that has given up the 9th most PPR points per target to perimeter wide receivers, DeAndre Hopkins is going to walk away with a fantastic week 4. All right, staying with the theme of wide receivers that have been forgotten, and apparently got forgotten by his own coaching staff, Christian Kirk. Wide receiver 33 on ECR this week. I'm telling you, he could be a wide receiver too. And this all comes down to the matchup and what we saw for Kirk last week. He got a 21.7% target share. His first read share last week jumped up to 32%. And look, if you're like me and you walked into this season thinking, okay, the wide receiver 1 in this offense is Christian Kirk, that's who you need to be drafting, this is exactly what you wanted to see. And I'm not saying that Brian Thomas Jr. is not a talented rookie. He's not good. But we need to get back to basics here. And if Dougie P wants this offense running and humming the way it should be, it needs to flow through Christian Kirk in the passing game. And that can happen this week against a Houston Texans secondary that has quietly been a slot funnel. They've given up the 2nd highest PPR points per target and the most receiving touchdowns to opposing slot wide receivers. So, all this means Christian Kirk wheels up in week 4. All right, getting to the number 1 player on this list has to be Khalil Shakir. Wide receiver 32 on FantasyPros right now. It's kind of blasphemous. Man's been producing. He's the wide receiver 20 in fantasy points per game. And we just talked about slot funnel defenses. That is where Khalil Shakir comes in this week. Baltimore has quietly been a wonderful slot funnel defense. 11th highest PPR points per target and the 5th highest receiving yards allowed opposing slot wide receivers. As well as, do we not think Khalil Shakir can produce running 82% of his routes against Kyle Hamilton? And I'm not telling you that Kyle Hamilton's bad, but in slot coverage, he hasn't been good this year so far. 88% catch rate allowed, 148 passer rating in his coverage. Josh Allen's going to be targeting anybody this week. It's going to be Shaquille. If Josh Allen's going to be targeting anybody this week, it's going to be Khalil Shakir. Heavy, early, and often, and he's going to produce for your lineups. All right, everyone, those are the picks that I pulled out of the primer. They're going to outproduce ECR in week 4. And again, if you are juggling multiple fantasy leagues and you're trying to just make sense of it all, let us make it easier for you. Use the multi-league assistant, dive into all the content on FantasyPros.com, including the primer this week, and win all of your matchups. I'll be back in week 5 with more picks.